good to go.
Yeah, you should have sound. Okay, Berl.
So, what do I say?
Well, we'll just start here, and I'll lead you through all of this. I'm Larry Parsons, and we're recording this on the 28th of August in 2003 in Manhattan, Kansas. And just for the record, I'd like to have you review some personal data, if you will, for us, your name and where you were born and what date and those kinds of things.
I'm Berl Koch, and I was born in Grimes, Iowa, which is on the northwest corner of Des Moines now. And my mother told me that I was too dumb to suckle when I was born, so she and the girl that was working with her rigged up a sugar titty, and I used that for 3 days, and then finally they started to get food into me. So I guess I came that close to dying, I don't know. And my first 23 years were spent in the Grimes area. I graduated from high school at Grimes High, 1936. I was all helped to go to college since we only lived 20 miles from Ames. And at that time, Iowa State was the only university that I'd ever heard of. And my dad was very much in favor of me going to college. In fact, he took me up to Ames to talk to a friend of his. He said if I didn't have $100 in the bank, I probably shouldn't try to start to college in 1936. Well, I didn't have $1 in the bank. But Dad said, well, if I'd work at home. He was quite an enterprising farmer. He was only a tenant farmer, but we ran a thrashing machine rig and a wood sawing rig and a corn fodder rig. So he had plenty of work, even though I had 3 brothers younger than myself. So he said, well, I could take my choice. I could see what happened in the draft, or I could just try to get an agricultural deferment and work at home. And we'd finally make it to college eventually. But I think it was about that time that the GI Bill was publicized, and I suppose that was the carrot on the stick for me. I figured that was an easy way to get to college. I didn't know how many years it might take, but...
Well, let's talk about some specifics. You finished high school and then worked for your father?
Yes. And
this was a farming type operation?
It was I guess an all-purpose farm. We had dairy, we milked 25 dairy cattle. We had 30 sows that we farrowed twice a year. We fed a few cattle. We actually only had a 160-acre farm, but we had a lot of, Dad was enterprising. We had a lot of rental property and so forth. He was one of these farmers who was always looking ahead. We had the first rubber-tired tractor in Polk County, Iowa, things like that.
So it was you, your dad, your mom, and 3 brothers then?
Yes. And I was the eldest, and I really kind of wanted to go to the Army. I don't know why. Stupid, I guess. But
As the war approached, did you consider volunteering, or did you wait for the draft?
Well, I decided to wait for the draft, see what happened.
Okay.
So
and when were you drafted?
In November of 41, I got the letter to report to Fort Des Moines for examination, and I was finally drafted on the 4th of January, 42.
Okay. And what was your first Army experience, if you will, after you were drafted? Where were you sent, and what kind of organization?
Well, the people at the draft center were going to suggest me as a tank driver since I was on a farm, knew how to drive a tractor. I have a horror of tight spaces, so I said no to that. So they sent me out as a rifleman.
Okay.
I went to Camp Roberts in California.
Where is Camp Roberts now? What part of California?
Oh, halfway between Los Angeles and San Francisco, someplace in that area.
Along the
Paso Robles, I guess.
Okay, all right.
And supposedly we were going to get 16 weeks of basic training, but they were short of men, I guess. They pushed it up. I only had 12 weeks of basic training, and I was moved to Fort Ord.
Okay, describe your basic training. What kinds of things were involved in that?
Oh, Lord. Well, we spent time studying communications, and we spent time learning how to fire a military rifle. We spent time walking, things like that.
You say walking, was it marching or walking?
It was marching, I guess. If you've never seen Camp Roberts was a big parade ground that had a high hill on, a high ridge, I guess you'd say, on one side. And invariably we had to go up over the hill before we could go any place, which we did.
Talk about living conditions at Camp Roberts. Shower facilities, dining facilities, those sorts of things.
Well, I guess I was just a dumb farm kid. I never complained too much about it. We had a lot of cold showers, but we had those at home. We didn't have interior bathrooms at home. We did have them in the Army camp. Things like that. I got along real well. I found life interesting there.
Were you in tents or barracks or what?
No, we were in barracks, and I guess I was fortunate. I seemed to be with a bunch of pretty nice people, or at least I got along with them.
All right. Were you able to keep track of any of those people over the years, or?
Not really, I guess. I started out keeping a diary. Then I got so busy I didn't have time to keep the diary.
You specifically mentioned communications in that basic training. What sorts of things?
Well, I spent a lot of hours cranking a field telephone out in somebody's cow pasture and things like that. I was interested in communications for some reason, and I sort of took to dot dash, what do you call it?
Morse code?
Morse code.
Uh-huh.
And I was able to pass 10 words on Morse code in a matter of days, I guess, and so that seemed to impress people. And then I was sent up to Fort Ord from there and attached to the 32nd Division, and they needed a BAR rifleman worse than they needed a communications man, so I was assigned to a BAR rifle company. I had a couple of big Indians from Wisconsin as shell carriers, and I got along there pretty well too. I thought it was all new to me, so I found it interesting.
And how long did you spend? How much time did you spend at Fort Ord then?
Probably about 2 or 3 months.
Okay.
That was the time that the government dropped the 2-year requirement for Air Force, and so the division gave us permission to apply for the Air Force, and several of us applied. I guess that must have been in March, maybe, and
March of 42?
42, yeah, and we didn't hear anything. And so, what was it? I can't even remember what times. In June, I guess, yeah. In June, the 32nd went from San Francisco to Australia, and we were on the dock in San Francisco that night in formation, and they called 5 of us out of the division and said we'd been transferred to the Air Force.
So So you came that close to having a boat ride to Australia then?
Yes, and I do have some friends who did go on the ride and walked back. I mean, the 32nd had a horrible time getting back up to the Philippines.
Okay.
But then they didn't know what to do with us. Our records, our clothing, everything was packed on the boat already. And so they sent the 5 of us home on indefinite leave. And we kept contact. One of the guys was from Iowa. And he was called back in July. For some reason, I wasn't called back till August. I was called back to the Presidio in August. And from there, well, it was off to Santa Ana for cadet training.
All right, talk to me about cadet training at Santa Ana. What kind of training? What kinds of activities?
Well, started out, I asked for navigation, and they put me in pilot training. I guess they needed pilots worse, and that was all right with me. And so we had, about 3 months of groundwork, and then I was sent off to Oxnard, California for pilot training, which was an interesting experience.
Okay.
And
tell us what was interesting at Oxnard. You said it was interesting.
well, you'd have to see it to believe it, but there was always a crosswind on the landing on the field because
What kind of airplane?
a steerman
Okay.
with bicycle wheels, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Anyhow, some people know what a steerman is, I guess.
My dad helped build Stearman.
It didn't take a very good technician to build one.
No, he was a farmer when he started building them.
No, but seriously, I always had trouble landing or taking off because in the morning the wind blew in from the coast, and in the afternoon it was blowing out from the coast. And
And the runway was parallel to the coast.
yeah, and I managed to solo and sent me up for a 20-hour check, and instructor said, well, you're doing all right, but we don't have time to spend to get you there. And so they decided that was enough of that. And again, I came before a board, and they decided that I was qualified for further air crew training, so they sent me back to Santa Ana. I asked for navigation again, and they sent me bombardier training. So I ended up down in Deming, New Mexico for bombardier training.
Okay, and this would have been almost 93 now?
Yes, because in August of 93 I was commissioned a bombardier in the U.S. Air Force.
Completed the training in August of 43
And
at Deming.
I guess I shouldn't brag, but I was featured as a picture of the class book holding a Norden bomb sight in a bag as the typical bombardier.
Now, the bombardier training, was it specific to any aircraft, or was it just on an aircraft, or more worried about the Norden bomb sight?
All of it was in the AT-11.
Okay.
Well, I guess we had AT-7s also. That was a solid nose for navigation training.
Mm-hmm.
But all of it was practically an AT-11.
All right.
And again, I had a silver bomb because I had a corrected error of 121 feet from 11,000 feet.
Okay.
Things like that.
No crosswind then, huh?
No, it was pretty easy with no flak or anything.
Yeah. So you completed your training. What was your next assignment then after completing bombardier training?
Completed the bombardier training and thought I was going to get to go to Europe in light bombardment. Instead, they sent me to instructor school at Midland, Texas, which was foreign service to me, but that was 3 months, I guess, 4 months, 16 weeks, I guess. And then I was sent back to Deming as an instructor, and I was a bombardier instructor there for, what, a year and a half, something like that. Anyhow, I came back to Deming, and things sort of settled down.
Tell me a little bit about the day-to-day activity as an instructor now back at Deming. How many students did you have, or were you a classroom instructor?
No, I was all. I did classroom instruction. We had the students at, high level bombing first, I guess. They went to 11,000 feet first. Then we did some training at 6,000 feet. Then the last 4 or 5 weeks while they were training low level, which meant you could fly between windmills and things like that.
Okay. Talk to me about the typical day when you show up at the flight line and you meet. How many students would you have?
I had 4
okay.
at a time.
And just
you had
talk me through what would go on from the time you show up at the flight line until you would go out to the airplane.
Well, you'd have pre-flight instruction for the students. You got weather information. You were generally assigned the same pilot through a whole class, and checked to make sure that the sand bombs were loaded properly, and just routine, I guess.
The students would calculate their bombing information ahead of time, or would that be done after they got to the airplane?
No, that was done in the morning, the first hour, I guess.
Okay.
I can't remember how early we reported the flight line, but it was pretty early.
And what time would you take off then, typically?
Well, it depended on whether you were flying afternoons or whether you were flying mornings or whether you were flying nights.
All right, but
we did all
show
three.
Up at a different time if
yeah.
you were flying at night. So if you show up at daylight, what time would you get airborne then? How many hours?
Well, it didn't take too long. Deming wasn't too big a base, really.
Okay.
They had 2 flight lines. I was on flight line 1. I don't know exactly. That was 50 years ago, you know.
Oh, I understand.
I don't remember.
Well, the reason I'm asking was how long you spent actually on the flight line, and then how long you would spend in the air training students. In other words, what did the student
again,
experience?
The time you spent in the air depends a little bit on what altitude you're going to train at. Yeah,
sure.
But it was a full half day before time you got out there and got up and got back down and turned in a report.
So a typical morning mission, you'd show up near sunrise and be back for lunch?
I'd say somewhere around 6 o'clock.
Okay, and then at night, if you were flying a night mission, what would that look like?
You went to the flight line again at about 6 o'clock, I guess.
Okay.
And
you'd be back in the barracks back in the ops building by midnight, or?
If you were flying nights, well, you probably didn't get back to bed till 1 o'clock in the morning, 2 o'clock in the morning, something like that.
Okay.
And
you mentioned the sand bombs. What describe those just a little bit?
Well, the training bombs were 100-pound bombs with 3 pounds of black powder in them.
Okay.
The rest of it was sand. And we had a student one night that dropped 4 of them on a little town down there in New Mexico at the town square intersection because he thought it was a target. I was sitting back in the co-pilot's seat not paying much attention. We were on our way out to the range, and all at once I heard the bomb bay open, time we discovered what was going on, why he had bombed that town square. And he did hit it. He didn't hurt anything particular, but he did knock the canopy off of one of the stores and things like that. And I was fortunate, I guess. I always got the...
You had a permanent range set up then, that bombing range?
Yeah, it was probably an hour from Deming, half an hour maybe, down towards El Paso.
And that was a separate operation? Did you have anything to do with that at all, or was it?
All we did was find it and bomb it and go home.
Okay. You didn't have to serve as a range officer or something like that?
No.
As part of your duties?
Never.
Okay.
And the students were strictly students, I guess you'd say. They did have to write a report when they came in from a flight. And one student always served as a photo man in the back of the airplane, taking pictures of the bombs. And
take pictures of the bombs on impact?
On the impact, yeah.
Is that the way they scored it, was with the...
With the camera, yeah. And gee, I haven't thought about that bombing range for a long time. I was fortunate, I guess. I was always the one who got the Jewish students and the Chinese students, put them on a bomb site, and they always turned the wheels backwards. But I had one student drop a bomb 1,500 feet from the target. I don't know how he did it, but he did it.
It's probably not a record either, is it?
Nobody set a draft fire, a grass fire. I don't know, it was an interesting life to me.
What was all of this done with the Norden bomb site now? Is that your only
Yeah, that's what we...
tool, if you will, for...
Yeah, that's the only one we played with.
Okay.
And then...
So you got to be pretty familiar with the Norden bomb site?
Well, I thought so.
Between instructing and using it.
Yeah.
That's hours and hours of experience with it.
Yes, and studying it. I suppose I could have put it together if I'd have had to.
Did it change over those 3 years or so that you, from the time you were a student until you finished instructing on it?
Not a whole lot in that period. They did put a different drift meter on it. I remember we were up at 11,000 feet one night. And you could crank in 25 degrees of drift, and that wasn't quite enough. In other words, we got up where there was quite a lot of wind blowing.
A little low jet stream activity.
Yeah. And no, I don't think they changed it much. We heard a lot about the, what was the other site they had? Somebody else made one that they did a lot of talking about, but we never did see one. We never did use one.
You said you had you told me what your accuracy was as a student.
Oh, well,
116.
That'd be bragging, I guess.
Well,
but
that's
I was pretty lucky with the bomb sight.
Talk to me about your students now. What kind of numbers did they graduate with, as far as accuracy is concerned?
Well, at 11,000 feet true above the ground, they probably graduated with 200-foot error, something like that. And then we had a 6,000 foot was another area that they counted. And you'd probably get mostly shacks with at 6,000 feet. But you had to remember that you had no flak.
This was a training environment.
You had no storm, because if it was stormy weather, we didn't fly.
So with a 200-foot circular error, to put it in perspective, that's kind of like hitting a football field, essentially. Is that?
Yeah.
trying to put it in some
That's
kind
probably
of,
fair, yeah.
some kind of scale that everybody's familiar with.
From 11,000 feet, they didn't have to rebuild the shacks very often.
Okay.
Let's put it that way. You'd get a shack once in a while. But, and it depended a little bit on your airplane. Some of them were easy. See, the bombardier had control of the airplane when the bomb was being dropped. And some of them were in a little better shape than others. And
talk to me about how often did you go out to fly and not get to fly because the airplane was out of commission or something was wrong with the equipment somehow?
well, all the time that I was instructing, only once, I think, did we have to come back to the field because malfunction. That night, they suggested that we fly to what they called the dump and drop the bombs, but the airplane wasn't flying but on one engine, so it didn't work very well. So we brought the bombs back.
Okay.
But that was the wrong thing to do because
So that was once out of how many years?
well, 700 and some hours anyhow. In the training command, I had 700 and some flight hours.
And how about aborting the mission before you ever take off because of engine problems or whatever? How often did that happen?
That hardly ever happened down there.
Okay.
Those AT-11s were pretty sound airplanes.
So if you went to the airplane to fly,
You usually got to
you
fly.
got airborne. Okay.
Once in a while, the weather would stop you. In other words, you get out the bomb range and the clouds had moved in or something like that.
Sure. Anything else that might stick out right now in the training environment there at Deming that you'd like to?
Well, it's off the subject, I guess, but while I was down at Deming, my wife and I were married out in Los Angeles. I managed to get out there for the wedding. And then we came back to Deming and we tried to set up housekeeping. And it was interesting. I was flying nights. We didn't have any silverware at home, so at night the MPs always brought me home. And we'd go to the mess hall first for coffee and donuts and things like that. I always put 2 or 3 forks or 2 or 3 knives in my pocket. That's the way we accrued our first set of silverware. But we found a room in town with a very nice lady. It had been a big ranch house originally, and we had what they used to call the living room, and the fireplace had imported marble from Italy in it, and so we could have hot plate and tea and things like that. But housing was kind of crude then, but my wife wanted to go with me, so she was with me.
How many of your fellow instructors or the permanent part of the staff there, how many of those folks were married? Had families
I'd
there?
say lieutenants, probably half of them were married,
Okay.
but not too many of them had their wives with them. They left their wife and baby at home. We didn't have any baby.
All right. Okay. And how about the students? Were any of the students married?
No, most of them were youngsters, I guess. They all had girlfriends. Used to hear about that a lot.
And Deming is the social hub of the universe, of course, for a young man.
Yes.
I've been to Deming, so I know.
You know where it is. 20 miles from the Mexican border, and we were restricted to 50 miles, so we could get to Silver City, which is 25 miles the other way. but we couldn't get to Las Cruces because Las Cruces was, 10 miles outside the limit.
And no one ever went to Las Cruces, of course.
Well, there were a lot of problems getting there and not getting caught.
Okay.
My wife went to El Paso on the train once in a while, she and the other girls.
But it is out in the middle of...
Nowhere.
Okay.
I've been back there too, and the university figures 40 acres per cow and calf on their range.
And that's probably not quite enough.
Probably. But I always thought I wanted to go back there, but I never could figure out how to make a living.
What after you were an instructor for 2+ years?
Something like that, yeah. And then came to work one morning and was posted on the bulletin board. I was assigned to Celestial Navigation School as per prior request. Well, way back in the beginning I had asked for navigation, but that was when they were tooling up for the 29s. So I went to navigation school in San Marcos, Texas, took my wife along, and we were there, 16 weeks.
And most of your classmates were from similar backgrounds, or were they coming in out of other airplanes, or were...
Well, many of them were second lieutenants who had been, some of them had been bombardiers. I guess most of them were in that first class. And San Marcos we were one of the early classes. I don't remember which one, but President Johnson went to school there. That's all we heard about. And finished that course.
You were training for the B-29.
Yes. And then on the final day, graduation day, 10 crews were taken out of that group and assigned to light bombardment in the 5th Air Force.
Which was?
I was one of the 10.
Okay.
And so that sent us to Mariana, which is up in the northeast corner of Florida, almost in Alabama. So we were in Mariana then for 4 or 5 months. And then I was assigned to go over.
What did you do for that 4 or 5 months? What were you doing?
Flying almost every day, a lot of low-level flying.
In what kind of airplanes?
A-26, wait a minute. Yeah. B-26, I guess they call it then.
Okay.
A-26 primarily.
2-engine?
Yeah.
High wing?
2-engine. Same engine that was on the C-46. So they were big engines. We could fly formation with a B-17 with one engine shut off. It was that big. And finally, we were assigned from there to go to Hawaii.
What kind of training now? What kind of activity were you training at during this 4 or 5 months at Mariana? Low level or?
Mostly low level.
Okay.
Yeah. Every once in a while somebody'd come back with leaves in the nacelle, and they'd catch heck for that. I remember one day we dived on a guy that was driving 2 mules on a plow or something, and he went one way and the plow went the other way. They used to be fun.
Talk to me about accidents in this environment. Did they lose any airplanes or just bend them up a little bit?
Well, they lost planes and men. I used to land riding up in the nose, and one of my buddies, their nose collapsed, and he hit the runway. So I started going back in the co-pilot seat then. Actually, we didn't have a co-pilot in the A-26. It was just a pilot and the bombardier navigator, then a gunner in the back who couldn't get to the front.
Okay, so four-man crew?
Three. Bombardier navigator was one man.
Oh, okay, bomb man,
Yeah.
okay.
And the gunner was isolated in the back. He was a top gunner. His seat was on top in the back, but he couldn't get out
He exited the airplane.
through the tail,
Yeah.
under the tail.
And that's the way he would bail out also.
Yeah.
If there was a problem.
We never had a bailout, but some people did, and they got away with it. Pretty good chance of getting hit by the tail if you took out on top. And that's where we got in and out, was top.
So you had 4 or 5 months of training, and I sense that most of that was low-level nav, bomb runs, and what have you.
We went from Pensacola to New Orleans one day without the radar picking us up.
Okay.
And I was sitting in the nose, and both engines were making a path on the water. We were that close to the water.
And that was the goal, was to fly undetected
Yeah.
over a bomb run, or over
Yeah,
a nav route into a bomb run and back out.
yeah. That was what they had in mind, I guess.
Okay. All right. So after the training, where did you go?
June of 45. Yeah, June of 45. We were assigned to the 5th Air Force, and we left our airplanes in California. The ATC was the ATC. The ATC was going to take the plane to Hawaii because the range was only about 900 miles, if I remember right. And they decided that we couldn't fly the minimum requirement, so
Well, that's a 2,100 mile leg, so to Hawaii at least.
well, they went direct from California to Hawaii. I don't remember how far it was. We rode a troop transport in 9 days out to Hawaii.
Okay.
My wife went home.
She stayed in California or went back to
No, her parents lived in Kenosha, Wisconsin, so she went back to Wisconsin.
Had she been working, your wife been working during this time period, or?
Not after we were married. She had a job in Los Angeles. What was it? Pacific Mutual, I think, insurance company.
Mm-hmm.
And her job was still open when I went home. When I went overseas, but she decided to go home instead.
So you went to Hawaii, and how long were you in Hawaii then?
We were in Hawaii about 6 weeks. We did Loran training.
And Loran is a navigational aid.
Well, we had an airplane that didn't have Loran in it. No, we did Loran training. We did a little bit of radar training. And then I guess you'd say I led a 3-plane group from Hawaii to Leyte by way of Christmas Island, Inuitak. There was somebody else in there. Guam, Leyte, Tacloban.
And this was in 45?
Yeah, had to be.
Okay.
Yeah, it was before they dropped the atom bomb. And we found out when we got to Tacloban that we were to be part of the first invasion in Japan.
Tacloban is a name I'm not familiar with now. Where is that at?
That was an Air Force field on Leyte,
Leyte, okay.
kind of towards the north end of Leyte. You know where the Gulf is? The Navy had half the Navy in there, I think, in the Gulf of Leyte. And we had a lot of airplanes.
And this was a build-up then
That's what we were told.
to move toward Japan, or
Supposedly they were going in on the 1st of November. we were kind of in the dark, really.
Sure. What? How long were you in this situation now, where you were just positioned, I guess, at Leyte?
Well, June, July, only about 2 months, I guess. Yeah, they dropped the bomb in August, and when they dropped the atom bombs, we were still there. So we took our planes up to Clark Field and parked them, and we rode up to Tokyo in the back of a C-46. and on the way up, we did circle Hiroshima, and it was neat. I mean, it was smooth.
Yeah. Okay. You were going to Tokyo to be stationed in Japan then?
We went. Well, I was stationed the headquarters of 5th Air Force in Tokyo.
Air Force up to Tokyo.
Yeah. And mostly I had a desk job up there. I was attached to Personal Affairs Office. I was writing letters of condolence for General Whitehead. I think it was General Whitehead was up there then. Anyhow, I was writing letters. Some jerk would buzz a plane in Tokyo Bay and hook a wing in the water or something, and some senator lost a son, and he wanted the son's body home. All they could find was a leg bone. Little things like that were kind of insignificant, and nobody knew what was going on for sure.
Where were you actually at in Tokyo? What kind of environment were you in? Because a lot of Tokyo had been burned, of course, with the bombing. So what kind of conditions?
See, we were bunked in the electric building in Tokyo, which wasn't very far from headquarters. We used to be able to watch MacArthur come to work in the morning, things like that. I don't know. I don't remember all these things. And we got to run around a little bit. I mean, we weren't very busy. And I did my 3 hours of flying a month to maintain my pay.
Mm-hmm. And you flew out of Tokyo or?
Tachikawa.
Okay.
I think Tachikawa. Anyhow, the last time I rode with a guy, a B-25, and he was West Pointer, so he was a hot shot. And we came down, and he overshot the field, really, but he said West Pointers never go around, so we went in. We skidded out in the rice paddy, and that B-25 went down belly deep in the dirt. And so I quit flying it.
That was you truly earned your flight pay that month? Is that?
Yeah, I got credit for it.
Is that the only incident or accident that you were involved in the 5 years or so that you were actively flying?
Yeah, I was in a lot of close ones, I guess. We were over Albuquerque one night, and I was riding the glass nose, and somebody flashed across in front of us, and
Altitude?
Same altitude and everything. He must have been within 50 feet of us, but nobody seemed to know who it was.
It happened so quick you couldn't even tell what kind of airplane it was.
You didn't even know what it was. And another time at Deming, we came in on one engine.
How about the terrain problems in New Mexico or any place else for that matter? Did the airplanes in the mountains get involved once in a while, or did you have any problem with that?
We didn't at Deming because you had fair weather almost the year round.
Well, with the night missions.
Yeah. Well, I remember calling the pilot one night and asking if he was going to turn or whether he was going to try to climb over the mountain in front of him. He had forgotten a little bit, I guess.
That's why it's a crew airplane?
Yeah. Uh, well, we had cadets in the back, and I was riding in the nose. And I don't know what he did. He just forgot, I guess. But he could have hit a mountain real quick. Then down in El Paso, did you ever see the mountain west of El Paso there? Where
Yes.
all the airplanes that didn't quite get over?
Yes. Did they call it Biggs Army Airfield then? Or?
Yeah. Yeah, we spent a night there once. We were on a cross country. We got caught in the searchlight there once too. We broke their airspace rule. That's the only time in my life I was ever in two of those searchlights. They're pretty hard to get out of. Identify yourself, that's all.
Yeah. And this was part of the air defense
This was our, yeah.
package that was around the border of the United States?
Yeah.
Is that, okay. Talk to me about, you didn't fly from the west coast to Hawaii, but you did fly from Hawaii on further west. Talk to me about the navigation problems that you had over water now. You said you had qualified in Loran, so you had Loran.
But we didn't have Loran.
But your airplane didn't have Loran, okay.
I did most of that on the drift meter.
All right.
Reading the waves, reading the drift off the waves.
Celestial, it was daytime, so you
Yeah,
had the
we always
sunlight.
flew in the daytime, but we got to, well, we went from Honolulu to Christmas Island, which is 900 miles south of Honolulu, I think. And we got to where I thought Christmas Island was, and it wasn't there. And it was one of those real hazy days when you can't really see whether you have glasses or whether you don't. So we started a circle the third time around while we saw the island. But
So
see,
there wasn't a beacon or anything on the island?
and that was radio silence. But the island's only 5 feet above sea level, so there wasn't much to see, really.
Then from Christmas, you went to Eniwetok? Is that
Can't,
right?
maybe Canton. Canton, is that out? I can't remember exactly. I think we went to Canton and then to Eniwetok.
Okay. I don't remember Canton.
Well, it was a little airfield. I can't remember really.
What did you find on these islands when you landed, like Eniwetok, for example? What kind of support was there other than fuel?
We spent a night and fuel. I'll always remember Eniwetok because the Navy had the beer and they wouldn't share it with the Air Force because they didn't have very much.
Rationed it to Navy only.
That's the way it was.
And after Eniwetok, then you stayed in what they have, thatched huts or
Yeah,
tent shelters or something for you to stay in. And
it was a barracks every place.
okay.
I don't think we ever hit a tent until we got to Leyte. Then we went to Guam, from Eniwetok maybe, to Guam. I know we were a night in Guam. I ran into a couple of guys there who were bombardiers that I had trained. They outranked me. But that was when they were firebombing Tokyo.
Okay, so they were flying bombers off of Guam, probably.
Yeah, they were flying B-29s.
And where did you land on Guam? At Ghana or
Don't ask me.
Anderson, or was there an Anderson then?
I don't remember.
Okay. What part of the island do you remember that? You had to find it.
Towards the south part, maybe.
All right. And that was a big island.
Yeah,
after-
yeah. We came in there. They had a 3-mile window and radio silence, and we made it. I mean, I was lucky.
And
But-
still just using drift meter and maybe a sunline or something.
Mostly drift meter, because we didn't even have a dome for using sextant.
Oh, okay.
No, we didn't even have a sextant line. I don't know whether they sent us out that way on purpose or whether they were testing.
Well, they had to move the airplanes, and
Yeah.
that was what they had to do to get them there.
But we got safely to Leyte. There we lived in tents. Typhoon one night. I remember I went to step out the tent door to go to the restroom, and the water was just about that far from the floor in the tent. They were all up on stakes, you know. But mostly they were drowning that night.
Survival.
Yeah, you had to bother with the geckos and animals coming into the tents because they were driving them up out of the
Sure.
underground.
Out of the water.
But I never did do much for the Army. I just was there.
Is there anything else that you can think of, your tour of duty in Tokyo now, after the war, or anything there that you remember that?
Well, I had enough time and enough points to come home, but I was waiting for air transport. Air transportation was hard to come by. And I slept next to the 5th Air Force transportation officer. He said, "Keep your bags packed, I'll get you a ride home some night." He called one night about 5:45 and said, "If you get to Tokyo or to Yokohama in the next 2 hours, why, I'll put you on a boat. There's always drunks and so forth that don't make their boat." And so I got a driver and threw my bags in the back of the Jeep, and we took off for Yokohama. And I came home on a troop carrier then. Was discharged at Fort Sheridan at Chicago.
Talk to me about the boat ride back, just before we get you discharged here.
It was well, I don't know, I enjoyed it. All we did, sit on the boat and watch the world go by.
Watch the water?
We came the northern route.
Did you stop in Alaska or?
No, Tacoma, what's right below Seattle.
I'm not familiar with the ports that
Well,
you might have gone into.
I can't remember the name of the fort, but we disembarked right south of Tokyo, or south of Seattle a ways.
Fort Lewis.
Fort Lewis, I think it was Fort Lewis.
Okay.
And rode a train to Chicago over the northern route, and the snow was about that deep. This was in January.
All right. And
And
you were discharged from the Army then?
yeah, I was discharged.
What rank were you? A first lieutenant?
First lieutenant.
All right.
I was discharged on the 6th of March, and I started the school at Ames on the 26th, I believe. And I had some leave still coming from the Army, so anyhow, there were a couple of months there when you always had a fuss about whether you couldn't get 2 paychecks from the government at the same time.
Between the GI Bill and the...
Yeah, and so I was getting a GI Bill, and I was also getting leave from the Army. I just remember there was a problem.
And you
And
started school at Ames then?
in March the
How
26th.
old were you now at this time? This was in...
27, 28.
And you were married?
Yeah. And my wife worked at the library and put me through school. Iowa State had quarter system then, so I spent 3 years getting my BS.
BS in?
Animal science.
Okay. And after you got your BS, and then where did you go from there? Did you go on to graduate school, or?
I went to Cornell in Ithaca for a master's degree in animal nutrition, and 46, 49, graduated in 49, went to Cornell, and left there in 51, and went to Davis, California. I did my doctorate at Davis. And Thanksgiving time of 55, Rufus Cox called me from here, said he knew by the grapevine that I was getting through at Davis, and would I be interested in the job? And I said yes, because nobody offered me a job yet. And waited till Christmas time, or near Christmas time, asked my major professor what should I do. He asked me if I was interested, but he never said anything else. So he said, well, call him and see if he's got a job. So I called. Yes, he could hire me the 1st of January of 56. And I hadn't quite finished my thesis. So after some haggling, why, I decided to take that job. I only had 2 offers. If you remember, 1956 wasn't the greatest of times to be getting out of college because 10 million other people were getting out. And I had an offer to Utah State, but I figured that Manhattan was 1,000 miles closer to home than Utah State was, and the price they offered was 1,000 more. So I came to work here at $6,000, and with the idea of not being here too long, but I'm still here. We've retired here. Our kids are scattered out. We have a son in Phoenix, and we have a son in Fargo, and we have a daughter out in Richland, Washington. And so we decided to retire here and let them come see us.
How about grandkids?
We got 5, all boys.
What would you want to tell your grandkids right now that about your life in general? We've talked about your whole life essentially here this morning.
That's just one chapter of it. Well, I don't know. I'd say keep looking, keep trying, be optimistic. I guess I've always been optimistic. My dad sort of taught that to me, I guess.
You did some kind of interesting things while you were here at KSU also. A little traveling, foreign service, if you will.
Well, I never took a sabbatic. I always took 2 years on the foreign program. We could do that then. I don't know if we can do it anymore. Maybe Ray can tell you. But yeah, 64 to 66, we were in Nigeria on a USAID KSU program. Then 70 to 71, we were back in Nigeria. And 78 and 79, we were in the Philippines. And 83 to 85, we were in Botswana. In 87, I retired.
Well, I'm sure that there are hours of stories there. If you like, we can reload the tape and keep going until 3 this afternoon.
No, I don't want to. I don't want to brag.
You've led a full life, and we thank you for giving us your time this morning, and we appreciate it very much. Thank you for everything you've done.
And the Lord has been good to me. Let's put it that way.
Great.